Close your eyes for a moment. Let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, drifting away like mist over water. Now, come with me. We're going back, far back, to a time before empires, before marble columns reached toward the heavens, before the name Rome ever echoed through history. We're traveling to the 8th century BCE, to a land the ancients called Latium, where the world was young and wild, and the only sounds were those that nature herself composed. Picture yourself standing on the banks of a river. Not just any river, the Tiber. Its waters move with a gentle, eternal rhythm, whispering secrets that only the reeds along its edges seem to understand. The current is neither rushed nor lazy. It flows with purpose, carrying silt and stories downstream, carving its path through the heart of what will one day become the center of the world. But right now, in this moment we're visiting together, there is no world center. There is only this river, these hills, and the endless sky above. The air here smells different than anything you know. It carries the sweet, earthy scent of wild grasses growing thick and tall along the riverbanks. There's a hint of clay in the breeze, and something else, something green and alive. The smell of a landscape that has never known pavement or pollution. If you breathe deeply, you might catch the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from a distant shepherd's fire, mingling with the mineral coolness that rises from the water itself. Look around you now. 7 hills rise from the valley like the knuckles of some sleeping giant's hand, gentle and rounded by countless seasons of rain and sun. The Palatine, the Capitoline, the Quirinal, the Viminal, the Esquiline, the Celian, and the Aventine, though they don't have these names yet, not in this time. They're simply hills, covered in oak and laurel trees. Their slopes dotted with wildflowers that sway in the warm Italian breeze. Sheep graze on the lower slopes, their bells tinkling softly, a sound that might lull you to sleep all by itself. The landscape is painted in shades of green and gold. The grass, sun-bleached in summer, glows amber in the late afternoon light. Olive trees, ancient even then, twist their silvery trunks toward the sun, their leaves shimmering like coins when the wind passes through. There are no roads here, only footpaths worn by shepherds and their flocks, winding between the hills like threads in some great natural tapestry. Listen, what do you hear? The river, always the river, its voice constant and soothing. The occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. The call of birds, perhaps a hoopoe with its distinctive song, or the caw of crows circling overhead. In the distance, you might hear the bleating of goats, the low bellow of cattle being herded home as evening approaches. There's a kind of spaciousness to the sound here, a clarity, no engines, no machinery, no human chatter beyond the occasional shepherd's song carried on the wind. The sun is beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. Shadows grow longer across the hillsides, and the light takes on that golden quality that makes everything look softer, more dreamlike. This is the hour when the world pauses, when day workers begin to think of home and hearth, when stories are born. This land, Latium, is a patchwork of small settlements and pastoral communities. The people here are shepherds, farmers, people who live close to the earth and mark their days by the sun's journey and the moon's phases. They worship gods who dwell in the trees and rivers, gods who watch over flocks and fields. Their lives are simple but not easy. There's danger here, too. Wolves prowl the hillsides at night. Neighboring tribes sometimes clash over grazing lands or water rights. Life and death walk hand in hand, as they always have, as they always will. But tonight, we're not here to witness the ordinary rhythms of pastoral life. We're here because something extraordinary is about to unfold. Something that will echo through centuries, that will be told and retold until it becomes legend, until it becomes the very foundation upon which a great civilization will build its identity. You see, the greatest stories, the ones that survive the erosion of time, that pass from tongue to tongue, from generation to generation, these stories often begin in the most unexpected ways. They begin with tragedy and hope intertwined, with abandonment and rescue, with cruelty and compassion existing side by side. They begin with moments that could go either way, where fate hangs in the balance, where the smallest choice might change the course of history. And this story, the one we're about to share, begins with two tiny lives floating in a basket on this very river. Two infants, barely born, cast out by a fearful king, but not yet abandoned by the gods. Their story will become Rome's story. Their blood, both divine and mortal, will run through the veins of emperors. Their image will be carved in stone, struck on coins, painted on walls, remembered in poems and prayers for thousands of years. But right now, in this moment, they are simply two babies, crying softly in the gathering dusk, drifting on water that reflects the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Take another deep breath. Let yourself sink deeper into this ancient world. Feel the warmth of the fading sun on your face. Smell the river water, cool and fresh. Hear the evening chorus of birds settling into their roosts. You are here, on the banks of the Tiber, in a time before history was written, before Rome was Rome, before the world knew what miracles and tragedies these 7 hills would witness. The river flows on, as it always has, as it always will, and somewhere on its surface, a small basket moves with the current, carrying a secret that will change everything. The story is about to begin. Let yourself drift with it. Let yourself flow with the gentle current of this tale. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen, and let the ancient world wrap around you like a soft blanket, carrying you toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the whispered legends of long ago. The 7 hills stand silent in the gathering night, waiting. The river whispers its eternal song, and 2 tiny hearts beat on, unaware that they will one day found an empire, unaware that their names, Romulus and Remus, will never be forgotten. Let's step back a little further now, before the basket, before the river, to understand how these 2 innocent lives came to be in such peril. Sometimes, to understand a story's heart, we must first understand the world that broke it. And this world, the world of Alba, the mother city that stood before Rome, was a world of power, jealousy, and ancient bloodlines tangled like roots beneath the earth. Alba was an old city, even by the standards of that ancient time. It sat nestled in the Alban hills, southeast of where Rome would one day rise. Its walls were strong, its temples sacred, its kings descended from heroes. The people there told stories of their founding, tracing their lineage back to Aeneas himself, the Trojan prince who fled burning Troy and sailed across the sea to establish a new homeland in Italy. This was a city proud of its past, a city where tradition mattered, where the gods were close and watchful. In this city lived a young woman named Rhea Silvia. Picture her, for a moment, a woman in her early 20s perhaps, with dark hair that caught the lamplight, eyes that carried both wisdom and sadness. She was a princess by birth, daughter of the rightful king of Alba, but she wore white robes, not royal purple, because her fate had been decided for her by forces beyond her control. Rhea Silvia was a Vestal virgin, one of the sacred priestesses dedicated to Vesta, goddess of the hearth and home. This was both an honor and a prison. Vestal virgins tended the sacred fire that must never be allowed to die, for if it did, catastrophe would surely follow. They lived in purity, bound by vows of chastity for 30 years. In exchange, they received respect, privileges, and the protection of the state. But they also surrendered the possibility of normal life, of marriage, of children, of love. Why would a princess become a Vestal virgin? The answer lies in the darker corners of family politics, in the ambitions of a man who should have protected her, but instead sought to control her future. That man was Amulius, Rhea Silvia's uncle, and the usurper of her father's throne, years before our story begins. When Rhea Silvia was still a child, Amulius had done the unthinkable. He had overthrown his own brother, Numitor, stealing the throne that was not his to take. Perhaps it happened through violence, or perhaps through cunning and manipulation. The old stories don't always agree, but the result was the same. Numitor was cast down, stripped of his crown and power, allowed to live but forced to watch as his brother took everything that should have been his. Amulius was a practical man, a calculating man. He understood that power was a fragile thing, always threatened by those who had a better claim to it. And Numitor's children were exactly such a threat. Numitor had a son, Rhea, Silvia's brother, and Amulius dealt with him swiftly and brutally. The young prince died under mysterious circumstances. An accident, some said, though few believed it. But what to do with Rhea Silvia? A princess carried her own dangers. She could marry, bear sons, and those sons would have a legitimate claim to the throne Amulius now occupied. They would grow up knowing they were the rightful heirs, and one day they might seek to reclaim what their grandfather had lost. This was a threat Amulius could not tolerate. So he found an elegant solution, one that appeared pious while serving his darker purposes. He made Rhea Silvia a Vestal virgin. This way she could never marry, never bear children, never produce heirs who might challenge him. And if anyone questioned his decision, he could claim he was honoring her with sacred service, when in truth he was simply eliminating a threat to his stolen power. Rhea Silvia accepted her fate because she had no choice. She entered the house of the Vestals, took her vows, and began her 30 years of service. She tended the sacred fire, performed the rituals, lived in enforced purity. Day followed day in quiet devotion, and perhaps she found some peace in the routine, some meaning in the sacred work. Perhaps she even believed that this was the life the gods intended for her. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. One spring evening, as Rhea Silvia walked alone in the sacred grove near the temple, something happened. The stories tell it different ways, and we cannot know for certain what occurred in that secluded place beneath the trees. Some say Mars himself, the god of war, appeared to her in all his terrible glory and claimed her for his own. Others suggest a more ambiguous encounter, a moment that existed somewhere between dream and waking, between divine intervention and earthly desire. What we know is this: Rhea Silvia, sworn to eternal virginity, found herself with child. Not just one child, but two twins growing in her womb. Impossible to hide as the months passed and her body changed. Can you imagine her fear, her confusion? In a society where Vestal virgins who broke their vows were punished by being buried alive, pregnancy was not just a scandal, it was a death sentence. Even claiming that a god was the father would sound like a desperate lie, a fantasy to escape punishment. Who would believe her? She kept her secret as long as she could, hiding beneath loose robes, avoiding the other priestesses when possible. But secrets like this cannot be kept forever. Eventually, someone noticed. Whispers began, and those whispers reached the ears of King Amulius. For Amulius, this was not just a scandal, it was both a threat and an opportunity. A threat because these children, if they were sons, would have an even stronger claim to his throne than their mother had. They would be the grandsons of Numitor, the rightful king, and if the story of divine paternity was believed, they would carry the blood of Mars himself. What more legitimate rulers could there be? But it was also an opportunity, because Vestal virgins who broke their vows must be punished. By enforcing that punishment, Amulius could eliminate the threat these children represented, while appearing to be nothing more than a pious king upholding sacred law. When Rhea Silvia gave birth in secret, attended perhaps by a trusted servant or midwife, she held her twin boys for only moments before they were taken from her. Two tiny infants, still wet from the womb, their eyes barely open, their cries filling a small dark room where no one of importance would hear them. Did she have time to count their fingers, to kiss their foreheads, to whisper prayers over them? The stories don't say, but we can imagine her anguish, the kind of grief that has no words, only the raw animal howl of a mother separated from her children. Amulius issued his orders with cold efficiency. The children were to be killed. They must be drowned in the Tiber River, their bodies given to the current, their threat eliminated before they drew their second breath. As for Rhea Silvia, her fate was sealed as well, though some versions of the story say she was imprisoned, others that she was executed, and still others that the gods took pity on her and transformed her into a goddess of the river itself, forever watching over the waters that would carry her sons. A servant was given the terrible task of taking the infants to the river. Picture him perhaps an older man, a soldier grown weary of following cruel orders. Or maybe a younger man who still remembered his own children at home. He was told to drown these babies, to hold them under the water until their struggles ceased, to make sure the job was done. But as he looked down at the two tiny faces, so new to the world, so innocent of the political machinations that had condemned them, something in him resisted. Perhaps it was compassion. Perhaps it was fear of divine retribution for killing infants who might truly be sons of a god. Perhaps it was simply the last shred of humanity in a heart that had witnessed too much cruelty. He could not do it. He would not do it. Instead, he found a basketa, simple woven thing, the kind used for carrying fruit or grain. He lined it with soft cloth, placed the twins inside as gently as he could, and walked to the river's edge. The water was high that season, swollen with spring rains, moving with purposeful current toward the sea. The servant set the basket on the water and pushed it away from shore. He watched it drift into the current, spinning slowly, moving downstream toward an unknown fate. Perhaps he told himself that he had followed orders. The children were in the river, after all. Perhaps he prayed to whatever gods he believed in, asking them to watch over two lives he had not had the courage to fully save, but also lacked the cruelty to fully end. The basket moved away, becoming smaller in the distance, until it disappeared around a bend in the river. The servant returned to Alba and reported that the king's orders had been carried out. Amulius believed the threat was ended. Rhea Silvia wept in whatever prison held her, and on the Tiber a small basket drifted onward, carrying two sleeping infants toward destiny. The throne was secure, or so Amulius believed. But fate, when set in motion, is not so easily stopped, and the river, ancient and patient, was carrying those children exactly where they needed to go. The basket moves with the river's rhythm, rocking gently like a cradle, guided by invisible hands. Inside, two tiny bodies shift and murmur in their sleep, unaware of the water beneath them, unaware of the danger they've just escaped, unaware that their lives hang suspended between the cruelty of men and the mercy of gods. Let yourself drift with them for a while. Feel the gentle motion of the current, the way the basket turns slowly as it travels downstream, catching different angles of the fading light. The Tiber in spring is a powerful thing, swollen with rainfall from the mountains, fed by countless tributaries that snake down from the Apennines. It moves with purpose and strength. The water is brown with silt, rich with the soil it carries from inland hills toward the distant sea. It's not a clear river. You cannot see the bottom, cannot know what lies beneath the surface. It holds mysteries in its depths, secrets that sink and are forgotten. But also sometimes, miraculously, it carries precious things to safety. The basket bobs and weaves through the current. Sometimes it spins in lazy circles where the water eddies near the bank. Sometimes it accelerates through narrower channels where the river focuses its strength. The woven reeds that form its walls are tight enough to keep water from pouring in, but droplets still splash over the edges, dampening the cloth inside, misting the faces of the sleeping infants with cool spray above. The sky deepens from blue to violet as evening advances. The first stars begin to pierce the darkening vault of heaven. Venus, bright and steady, appears low on the western horizon. The Romans would later call her their ancestral mother, the goddess from whom their people descended. But right now, she's simply a point of light watching over the river, witnessing what unfolds below. Birds skim the water's surface, hunting insects in the last light of day. A heron stands motionless in the shallows, its patience eternal, its focus absolute. It doesn't even glance at the basket as it drifts past, just another piece of flotsam carried by the eternal flow. Further upstream, you might hear the distant voices of fishermen calling to one another as they pull in their nets, their day's work ending as the sun sets. They don't see the basket either. It's just one small thing on a big river, easy to miss, easy to overlook, but someone or something is paying attention. The basket drifts for what might be hours, though time moves differently on water, especially in that liminal space between day and night when the world shifts from one state to another. The twins sleep through most of it, lulled by motion and exhaustion, their small bodies conserving energy, waiting for whatever comes next. Occasionally, one of them whimpers, a soft sound that's carried away by the wind before it can travel far. But mostly they're quiet, two tiny passengers on an unexpected journey. The river begins to curve, bending around the base of what will one day be called the Palatine Hill. Here the current slows slightly, widening as the channel broadens. Reeds grow thick along the eastern bank, creating a natural buffer between the water and the land beyond. It's a sheltered place, protected from the stronger currents in the center of the river, a place where things that float tend to collect and rest. The basket, following the path of least resistance, as all things do, begins to drift toward these reeds. The current pushes it gently but persistently toward the shore. The woven bottom scrapes against something beneath the surface, perhaps a submerged log, perhaps a stone, and the motion changes. Instead of floating freely, the basket begins to catch on obstacles, to slow down, to angle toward the bank. There's a fig tree growing near the water's edge here, its roots exposed where the river has eroded the soil, creating a small overhang. The tree is old, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches spreading wide to create a canopy of broad leaves. Later Romans will call this the Ficus ruminalis, the sacred fig tree, and they'll mark the spot as holy ground, the place where everything began. But right now, it's just a tree providing shade and shelter, its roots reaching down into the water like fingers. The basket drifts into these root systems and catches. It rocks there for a moment, held by the gentle pressure of the current pushing it against the immovable wood. Water laps at its sides, making soft lapping sounds, the kind of white noise that soothes and calms. The basket settles into this temporary haven, no longer moving, no longer drifting, simply resting as if it has arrived at its destination. One of the twins begins to cry. Not a full wail yet, just the beginning notes of distress, hunger perhaps, or cold, or simply the primal need for contact that all infants carry in their bones. The sound is small but clear in the evening air, cutting through the river's constant murmur, through the rustling of leaves overhead, and something hears it on the hillside above. Not far from where the basket has come to rest, there's a cave. It's a natural formation, carved by water in some ancient time, hidden partially by brush and trailing vines. The entrance is dark, a mouth opening into the hill itself, and from within comes a stirring, a movement of something large, responding to the sound of infant cries. A wolf emerges from the darkness. She's a beautiful creature. If you can appreciate the beauty of wild things, lean and powerful, her coat thick and gray with hints of tawny brown along her flanks. Her eyes are amber, catching the last light of day, reflecting it back with an almost otherworldly glow. She moves with the fluid grace of a predator, muscle and sinew working in perfect coordination, paws silent on the rocky ground. But this wolf is not hunting. Or rather, she is, but not for prey in the usual sense. She's searching for something specific, driven by instincts that go deeper than hunger, older than memory. You see, This wolf is a mother. She has recently given birth herself, a litter of pups that nurse and tumble and sleep in the safety of her cave. Her body is still swollen with milk, her maternal instincts running high and strong, and she has heard crying. She picks her way down the hillside toward the river, her movements careful, her senses alert to every sound. The crying grows louder as she approaches, not one voice now, but two, as the second twin joins his brother in distress. They're hungry, cold, frightened in the way that all abandoned children are frightened, crying out for comfort that hasn't come. The wolf reaches the river's edge and pauses. Her nose works the air, pulling in information that we cannot access: the smell of milk and infant skin, the scent of the cloth in the basket, the river's mineral temps, the fig tree's woody aroma. She can smell fear and helplessness, and something in her responds to it. She wades into the shallow water near the bank, her fur darkening as it gets wet, her paws sinking slightly into the soft mud. She reaches the basket where it rests against the fig roots and lowers her head to investigate. Her nose touches the edge of the basket, and the twins' crying intensifies. For a moment they sense presence without understanding what it means. What happens next is one of those moments where the world holds its breath, where fate balances on a knife's edge. A wolf finding helpless infants. This should be a tragedy, a horror story, a tale of nature's cruelty. Wolves are predators. They hunt, they kill, they feed their young with the flesh of other creatures. But this wolf, in this moment, makes a different choice. Perhaps it's the milk-swollen breasts that drive her, the biological imperative to nurse anything that cries with need. Perhaps it's something deeper, some recognition that transcends species, some universal language of motherhood that speaks the same regardless of whether you walk on 2 legs or 4. Or perhaps, this is what the Romans would come to believe, filling her wild heart with unexpected compassion, using her as their instrument to save 2 lives that must not be allowed to end. The wolf opens her jaws carefully, gently, and takes the edge of the basket between her teeth. Her bite is controlled, precise, strong enough to grip, but careful not to puncture the woven reeds. She begins to back up, pulling the basket with her, dragging it through the shallow water toward the shore. The basket scrapes against stones and roots, but holds together. Water sloshes inside, but the twins, though wet and crying, are alive, are safe, are being rescued by the most unlikely savior imaginable. The wolf pulls them clear of the water, up onto the muddy bank, and then continues, dragging the basket up the hillside toward her cave. It's hard work. The basket is awkward. The slope is steep, and she has to stop several times to adjust her grip. But she doesn't give up. Something drives her forward, some certainty that this is what must be done. Step by step, pause by pause, she hauls her unexpected cargo up the hill. The entrance to the cave finally appears before her, that dark mouth opening into safety. The wolf maneuvers the basket through the opening into the dimness within, where her own pups sleep in a furry pile against the far wall. She sets the basket down gently and noses open the cloth covering. 2 tiny human faces look up at her, their crying subsiding into hiccups and whimpers. Their eyes can barely focus yet, but they seem to sense that something has changed, that the immediate danger has passed. The wolf lowers herself down beside the basket, her body warm and solid, and she begins to nuzzle the infants, licking their faces clean of river water, warming them with her breath and body heat, and then, following instincts that know no boundaries between species, she offers them her milk. The twins latch on instinctively, their tiny mouths finding sustenance, their small hands gripping her fur. The wolf settles in, surrounding them with her warmth, letting them feed, letting them live. Outside the cave, the river flows on, indifferent and eternal. The stars continue their slow wheel across the sky. The night deepens, bringing coolness and peace to the 7 hills. And in a cave on the Palatine, a wolf becomes a mother to 2 human children, beginning a bond that will never be forgotten, creating an image that will endure for millennia. The she-wolf nursing the twins, the wild protecting the helpless, nature offering mercy when humanity has shown only cruelty. The basket that carried them here rocks empty now in the corner of the cave, its job complete. The fig tree stands silent by the river, a witness to miracles, and to tiny hearts beat on, stronger now, fed and warm and safe, sleeping against fur instead of drowning beneath water. The gods, if they're watching, must be pleased. The river has delivered its cargo. The wolf has answered her calling. And Rome's story, though no one knows it, yet has truly begun. In the cave, time moves differently. There's no sun to mark the hours, no clock to measure minutes, only the rhythm of breathing, the cycles of sleep and waking, the primal pattern of hunger and satisfaction that governs all infant lives. The wolf has created a world within the hill, a sanctuary carved from stone and darkness, where 2 human babies now exist in a space between the wild and the civilized, between what should be possible and what miraculously is. Let yourself settle into this cave for a while. Feel the coolness of the stone walls, ancient rock that has stood here since long before humans walked these hills. The floor is covered with dried grass and leaves that the wolf has gathered, creating a soft nest for her young. There's an earthiness to the smell here, soil and stone, animal musk, milk and warmth. It's not unpleasant, this scent. It's honest, real, the smell of life continuing in its most basic forms. The cave entrance faces east, so morning light filters in gradually, painting the darkness with shades of gray before true dawn arrives. But at night, the darkness is complete and absolute. The twins sleep through these dark hours, pressed against the wolf's warm belly, her fur soft beneath their searching fingers. Her breathing is steady and deep, a rhythm they quickly learn to match, their small chests rising and falling in time with hers. The wolf, the she-wolf, as the Romans will forever call hers, remarkably gentle with her adopted charges. She treats them as she treats her own pups, with a mixture of fierce protectiveness and patient tolerance. When they cry, she licks their faces, cleaning them, as a mother wolf cleans her young. When they're hungry, she positions herself so they can nurse, lying on her side, letting them feed alongside her biological children. Her own pups are curious about these strange new siblings. They're young themselves, perhaps 3 or 4 weeks old, their eyes newly opened, their legs still wobbly when they try to walk. They tumble over each other to investigate the human infants, sniffing at their bare skin, pawing gently at their wrappings. One bold pup licks Romulus's tiny fist, and the baby's fingers flex instinctively, grasping at air. The pup retreats, startled, then creeps forward again, beginning the slow process of acceptance. There's a natural order to life in the cave. The she-wolf is the center, the provider, the protector. She leaves periodically to hunt, to drink from the river, to patrol the territory around her den. But she never stays away long, not now, not with so many young to care for. She returns with prey in her jaws, small animals that she tears apart to feed herself, needing the nutrition to continue producing milk for her expanded family. The twins grow stronger day by day. Wolf's milk is rich and fatty, perfect for rapid growth. And though human babies and wolf pups have different needs, the basic sustenance is enough. Romulus and Remus begin to gain weight, their skin losing that translucent newborn quality, their muscles developing tone. Their eyes, which could barely focus at first, begin to track movement, following the she-wolf as she moves about the cave, watching the pups as they play. And they begin to make sounds, not just cries of distress, but other noises too. Gurgles and coos, soft vowel sounds that echo slightly off the stone walls. The she-wolf responds to these sounds, turning her head toward them, sometimes answering with her own low rumbles and whines. It's communication of a sort, a language that exists below words. In the realm of tone and emotion and pure need, the cave becomes their entire universe. They know nothing of palaces or politics, nothing of the uncle who tried to kill them or the mother who wept for them. They know warmth and cold, hunger and satisfaction, the rough texture of wolf fur and the smooth coolness of stone. They know safety at night. When darkness fills the cave completely, the she-wolf often howls. It's a sound that carries across the hills, echoing through the valleys, announcing her presence to the world. Other wolves answer from distant territories, their voices weaving together in a haunting chorus that has filled these hills since long before human settlements existed. The twins, nestled against her side, feel the vibration of her howl through her body, feel the power of it resonating in their small bones. Perhaps, in some way they cannot yet understand. They're being taught about belonging, about calling out to claim your place in the world, about answering when others call to you. The she-wolf is teaching them other things too. Though the lessons are wordless and instinctive, she's teaching them about hierarchy and pack structured. The wolf pups are learning to recognize her authority, to submit when she growls, low in warning, and the human twins are learning the same lessons, responding to her moods and signals even though they don't have the language to name what they're learning. She's teaching them about patience, about waiting for food when they're hungry, about accepting comfort when they're frightened. She's teaching them that the world can be trusted, that when they cry out in need, someone will come. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all, the foundation upon which all future courage and confidence will be built, the deep, bone-level knowing that they are not alone, that they belong to something larger than themselves. The Romans, in later centuries, will make much of the wolf as a symbol. The wolf will appear on their coins and standards, in their art and architecture. They'll see in the wolf everything they aspire to be: fierce but not cruel, strong but not mindless, loyal to the pack but independent in spirit. The wolf, they'll say, represents the Roman character itself, practical, resilient, able to survive in harsh conditions, protective of its own. But here in the cave, the wolf is not yet a symbol. She's simply a mother, doing what mothers do, feeding, protecting, teaching, loving in the way that her species knows how to love. There's no philosophy here, no grand meaning, just the day-to-day work of keeping young things alive. Days turn into weeks. The twins grow from helpless newborns into infants with personality. Romulus is slightly larger, louder, more demanding. He cries with force when he's hungry, and the she-wolf attends to him first, responding to the intensity of his need. Remus is quieter, more patient, content to wait his turn. He watches everything with dark, serious eyes, taking in the world around him with an intensity that seems unusual for one so young. The wolf pups are growing too, becoming more coordinated, more playful. They wrestle with each other in the cave entrance, where the light is better, tumbling and growling in mock battles. Sometimes they try to include the human babies in their games, nosing at them, pawing gently at their swaddled forms. The twins cannot yet participate their weeks behind the pups in development, cannot crawl or walk or even sit up on their own butt. They watch, their eyes following the movement, their brains making connections, learning about play and interaction and the joy of physical movement. There are dangers, of course. The wilderness that cradles them also threatens them. Other predators roam these hills: bears, wild boars, other wolf packs that might see the she-wolf's unusual family as a threat or an opportunity. Human shepherds sometimes venture close, their flocks grazing on the hillsides, their dogs barking warnings at any scent of wolf. The she-wolf must be constantly vigilant, ready to defend her den and her young against any threat. One night, a male wolf approaches the cave, perhaps the father of her pups, perhaps a stranger drawn by her scent. The she-wolf emerges to meet him, and her growls echo through the darkness. The twins, inside the cave, hear the confrontations, snaps, the scrabble of claws on stone. Then silence. Then the she-wolf returns, alone, blood on her muzzle, from where she's driven the intruder away. She settles back down with her young, licking her paws clean, her body still tense and alert. The message is clear. These are her children, all of them, and she will tolerate no threat to their safety. The moon waxes and wanes outside the cave entrance, marking time in its ancient way. The twins reach the age of 6 weeks, then 8, then 10. They're beginning to hold their heads up steadily now, to grasp at things intentionally rather than just reflexively. They respond to the she-wolf's face, their eyes brightening when she appears, their mouths making small sounds of greeting. They've imprinted on her completely. She is mother. She is safety. She is the entire world. But the world beyond the cave is waiting, and it will not wait forever. One warm afternoon, when the twins are perhaps 3 months old, a human voice echoes across the hillside. It's calling to sheep, guiding them, keeping them together as they graze. The she-wolf, lying at the cave entrance with her charges around her, lifts her head sharply. Her ears swivel, tracking the sound. Her body goes rigid with tension. The voice comes closer. And then, appearing over a rise in the hill, a man comes into view. He's older, weathered by sun and wind, wearing the simple clothes of a shepherdess, rough tunic, sandals, a staff in his hand. He's following a way that has wandered from the flock, determined to bring her back before she gets into trouble. The man stops abruptly. He's seen the wolf. The she-wolf sees him too. For a long moment, they stare at each other across perhaps 50 paces of hillside. The man's hand tightens on his staff. The Chevalf's lips begin to pull back from her teeth. Every muscle in her body prepares for fight or flight. But then, carried on the afternoon breeze, comes a sound that changes everything: a baby's cry. Not a wolf pup's whimper, but the distinctive wail of a human infant. The sound comes from the cave behind the Chevalf, unmistakable in its humanity. The shepherd's eyes go wide. He takes a step forward, trying to see into the darkness of the cave. The Chevalf growls, warning him back, but curiosity has him now. Curiosity mixed with concern. What is a human baby doing in a wolf's den? He calls out, his voice gentle despite his fear. Easy now, mother wolf, easy. I mean no harm. The Chevalf doesn't understand the words, but perhaps she understands the tone. Or perhaps she's simply grown weary of hiding, of constant vigilance, of trying to protect these strange children who cry with human voices and will never truly belong to the wild world that has sheltered them. She doesn't attack. She doesn't flee. She simply stands her ground, waiting as the shepherd slowly, carefully begins to approach. Behind her, in the cave, two babies cry for milk, for warmth, for the comfort of the only mother they've ever known. And on the hillside, a new chapter is about to begin, one that will bridge the gap between wilderness and civilization. Between the wolf's cave and the shepherd's hearth, the Chevalf has done her part. She has saved them, nursed them, kept them alive through weeks when they should have died. But even the most devoted animal mother cannot raise human children forever. The world of humans is calling them back, and destiny is about to place them into new hands, rougher hands, perhaps, but human ones. Hands that can teach them language and customs and all the things they'll need to know to become the men they're meant to be. The shepherd takes another step forward. The Chevalf's growl deepens, but she doesn't charge. And in the cave, oblivious to the drama unfolding, Romulus and Remus continue crying, their voices carrying across the hills, announcing their existence to a world that thought them dead, calling forth the next act of their miraculous survival. The wolf has been their first mother, their wildest mother, the one who taught them that nature itself can show mercy when humans show only cruelty. They will never forget her. Rome will never forget her. And her image, the Chevalf with the nursing twins, will become eternal, carved in stone and bronze, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, wearing fur instead of human skin, offering milk and warmth when all the palaces of the world offer only death. The shepherd's name was Faustulus, though you wouldn't know it to look at him. There was nothing grand or remarkable about his appearance. He was simply one of many men who made their living on these hills, guiding flocks, mending fences, living close to the land in the way that shepherds always have. His face was lined and weathered, burned dark by years under the Italian sun. His hands were calloused and strong, scarred from 1,000 small injuries, bramble scratches, rope burns, the cuts that come from working with animals and tools. He was neither young nor old, perhaps 40 years of age, though hard work made precise age difficult to guess. But there was something in his kindness there, a depth of compassion that went beyond the ordinary. He was the kind of man who would stop to help away in difficult labor, even if it meant losing sleep. the kind who shared his meager lunch with his dogs and spoke to them as if they were friends rather than merely useful animals, the kind who noticed suffering and felt compelled to do something about it, even when doing something was difficult or dangerous. And so, when he heard human babies crying from within a wolf's den, when every instinct told him to back away slowly and leave well enough alone, Faustulus instead moved forward, step by careful step, speaking in low, soothing tones to the she-wolf who blocked his path. He approached the cave. The she-wolf watched him with those amber eyes, assessing, calculating. She could kill him if she chose. Her jaws were powerful enough to crush bone, her instincts honed by countless generations of predators. But something in Faustulus's manner, some combination of respect and determination and genuine concern, stayed her attack. When he reached the cave entrance, she stepped aside, though her body remained tense, ready to intervene if he threatened her charges. Faustulus peered into the darkness of the cave and saw something that would puzzle storytellers and historians for thousands of years to human infants, healthy and strong, lying among a litter of wolf pups. The babies were perhaps 3 or 4 months old, well fed despite their impossible circumstances, their skin clean, their eyes bright. They looked up at him and reached out their small hands, making the wordless sounds that all babies make when they want to be held. He gathered them carefully, one in each arm, speaking softly to the she-wolf as he did so. "Thank you, Mother. You've kept them safe, but they need human hands now, human milk, a human home. You've done more than anyone could ask." Whether the wolf understood or not, she didn't try to stop him. She watched as he wrapped the infants in his rough cloak and backed slowly out of the cave, keeping his eyes on her until he was a safe distance away. Only then did he turn and hurry down the hillside, the twins secure against his chest, his mind already racing with questions. Where had these babies come from? How had they ended up in a wolf's den? And more practically, what was he going to do with them now? His wife, Acca Laurentia, was waiting at their modest home at the base of the hills. When she saw what he carried, her hands flew to her mouth in surprise. But surprise quickly turned to action. She was a practical woman, a shepherd's wife, used to dealing with unexpected situations. Within moments, she had the babies unwrapped and examined, checking them for injuries or illness, marveling at their health despite their bizarre circumstances. "Where did you find them?" she asked, even as she prepared a cloth to wash them. "In a wolf's den. Being nursed by a she-wolf." Faustulus said it simply, knowing it sounded impossible. Acca Laurentia looked at him sharply, searching his face for signs of jest or madness. But she saw only honesty there, and wonder. She looked back down at the twins, seeing them with new eyes. "Boys touched by the gods," she murmured. "They must be, to survive such a thing." Faustulus and Acca Laurentia were not wealthy people. Their home was a simple structure: stone walls, a thatched roof, a hearth in the center where smoke rose through a hole above. They had a few goats, some chickens, a small garden where Acca Laurentia grew vegetables and herbs. They lived on what the land provided and what Faustulus earned through his labor with the flocks. It was not an easy life, but it was honest, and there was a contentment to it that palaces often lack. They had raised children of their own. The stories vary on how many. Some saying 12 sons, others saying they had lost children in infancy, and their arms ached for babies to hold. Regardless, they had love to give and knowledge to share. They decided, without much debate, to keep the twins and raise them as their own. They named them Romulus and Remus, the names either coming to them through divine inspiration, or perhaps the babies had been wearing some scrap of cloth with names marked upon it, or perhaps Faustulus and Acca Laurentia simply chose names that felt right. The origins are lost to time, but the names stuck, and the boys became, in the eyes of everyone who knew them, the shepherd's sons. The twins grew up in simplicity, surrounded by the rhythms of pastoral life. Their earliest memories would have been of goats bleating in the morning, of the smell of fresh bread baking on the hearth, of their mother, Acca Laurentia's voice singing old songs as she worked. They learned to walk on packed earth floors, to run through fields of wildflowers, to help gather eggs from the chickens before they were tall enough to see over the nesting boxes. Faustulus taught them everything he knew, beginning from the moment they could understand. He taught them to recognize the signs of whether which clouds meant rain, how to read the wind, when to bring the flocks to shelter before storms arrived. He taught them about animals, about the different temperaments of sheep and goats, about which plants were safe to eat and which would sicken you. He taught them to track, following footprints in soft earth, reading the stories that animals left behind in their passages. Everything speaks, he would tell them as they walked the hills together. You just have to learn to listen. The birds tell you when predators are near. The plants tell you where water flows underground. The clouds tell you tomorrow's weather. The world is always talking. Most people just don't pay attention. The boys learned to pay attention. They learned to move quietly through underbrush, to approach a nervous Awe without startling her, to find lost lambs by listening for their bleating and following it to its source. They learned patience, how to sit still for hours watching a flock, how to wait for the right moment to act, how to let things develop in their own time. They learned about responsibility, too. From the time they could walk steadily, they had chorest small ones at first, gathering kindling or filling water jars, but growing more substantial as they grew. By the time they were 7 or 8, they were trusted to take small groups of goats to pasture and bring them back safely. By 10, they could handle a full day's work, up before dawn, out with the flocks until sunset, falling into bed, exhausted but satisfied. But Faustulus taught them more than just practical skills. He taught them about justice and fairness, about treating animals with respect, about sharing what you have with those who have less. He taught them that strength should be used to protect, not to dominate, and that true courage often meant doing the difficult right thing rather than the easy wrong thing. Any fool can be cruel, he would say. It takes no skill to hurt something weaker than yourself. But to be strong and choose kindness anyway, that takes real strength. That's the mark of a good man. Acca Laurentia taught them different lessons, equally valuable. She taught them about home, about the work of making a place comfortable and welcoming. They learned to cook simple foods, to mend their own clothes, to keep a hearth burning through the night. She taught them songs and stories, filling their minds with the old tales of heroes and gods, of Troy's fall and Aeneas's journey, of the founding of Alba Longa and the deeds of ancient kings. She taught them gentleness, too, in the way she tended injuries human and animal alike, with capable hands and soothing words. When Romulus fell from a tree and split his knee open, she cleaned and bandaged it without fuss, teaching him that pain was temporary but carelessness could cause permanent damage. When Remus found an injured bird and brought it home in tears, she showed him how to make a small nest from grass, how to feed it water with a cloth, how to care for something fragile without smothering it with too much attention. The boys were different from each other, even from early childhood. Romulus was bolder, louder, always the first to volunteer for any challenge. He climbed higher trees, ran faster races, spoke more freely with strangers. He had a natural confidence that drew others to him, a charisma that made even older boys listen when he spoke. Remus was more thoughtful, more observant. He noticed things that others missed: the slight limp in a goat's gait that signaled an injury before it became serious, the way the shepherd two hills over mistreated his dogs, the patterns in which wild animals moved through their territory. He asked questions constantly, wanting to understand not just how things worked, but why they worked that way. Despite their differences, they were inseparable. They worked as a team, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, each amplifying the other's strengths. Where Romulus might rush into a situation, Remus would hold back and assess. Where Remus might hesitate, Romulus would provide the courage to act. Together, they were formidable. The other children in the area, sons and daughters of shepherds and small farmers, became their companions and rivals. They played the games that children have always played: races and wrestling matches, hide and seek among the hills, mock battles with sticks for swords. The twins usually won these contests, their combination of natural athleticism and strategic thinking giving them an edge over others their age. But they were never cruel in victory. Faustulus had taught them better than that. They helped younger children, taught them what they knew, included the shy and awkward in their games. They earned respect, not just through their abilities, but through their character. And by the time they reached adolescence, they were natural leaders among the young people of the hills. They learned about the wider world too, though slowly. Faustulus would sometimes take them to local markets, where shepherds sold wool and cheese, where farmers traded grain and vegetables, where craftsmen displayed simple tools and pottery. The boys saw that there were other ways to live beyond their hillside, other skills beyond shepherding. They saw merchants from distant cities, soldiers passing through, priests from various temples. Their world expanded, though home remained the anchor that held them. Faustulus never told them the truth of how he'd found them, not in those early years. Perhaps he feared what the knowledge might do to them, or perhaps he simply didn't know how to explain it in a way they could understand. So they grew up believing themselves to be his natural sons, humble shepherd boys with no heritage beyond hard work and honest living. But Laurentia sometimes looked at them with an odd expression, a mixture of wonder and worry. She would see how tall they grew, how strong, how natural their authority over others. She would hear them discussing complex ideas with a sophistication that seemed beyond their years and education. And she would wonder about the she-wolf who had nursed them, about the divine providence that had saved them, about what destiny awaited these boys who had survived the impossible. At night, after the boys were asleep, she would sometimes speak her concerns to Faust. "They're special," she would say. "Anyone can see it. They're meant for something more than this." And Faustulus would nod, because he'd known it from the moment he'd found them. Yes, he would agree. But for now, let them be boys. Let them learn about sheep and stars, about kindness and courage. Whatever they're meant for will find them soon enough. For now, they're safe. They're loved. They're learning what it means to be good men. That's enough. And so the years passed, measured not in grand events, but in small moments, successful lambing seasons, summer storms, autumn harvests, winter nights around the fire. The twins grew from babies to boys to young men, their bodies hardening with labor, their minds sharpening with experience, their characters forming under the patient guidance of two people who had chosen to love them despite having no obligation to do so. They learned that family isn't always about blood. They learned that nobility comes from actions, not ancestry. They learned that the world is full of beauty if you pay attention, and full of meaning if you look for it. They learned to work hard, to think clearly, to care deeply, to act justly. They didn't know they were princes. They didn't know their mother had been a Vestal virgin, or their father a god. They didn't know that a king had tried to kill them, or that they had a birthright waiting to be claimed. They were simply Romulus and Remus, sons of Faustulus, the shepherd, boys of the hills, young men learning to be good and strong and wise. But the truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever. And soon, very soon, destiny would come calling, and these shepherd boys would learn who they really were, and everything would change. For now, though, there was just the hillside, and the sheep, and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and two brothers walking home together, their laughter carrying on the wind, their future unknown, but their present rich with simple, honest life. The years passed like water over stones, slowly but surely shaping everything they touched. Romulus and Remus grew into young men 18 years old now, standing at the threshold between youth and full adulthood. They were tall and strong, their bodies hardened by years of work in the hills, their faces bronzed by sun and wind. When they walked through the settlements scattered across the valleys, people noticed them. There was something about the twins that commanded attention, an indefinable quality that went beyond their physical presence. They had become leaders without seeking the role. Other young men gravitated toward them, seeking their opinions, following their suggestions, asking them to settle disputes. The twins were known for their fairness, their courage, their willingness to stand up against injustice. When bandits troubled the area, it was Romulus and Remus who organized the young shepherds into groups that could defend themselves. When conflicts arose between neighboring families, they were often called upon to mediate, and their judgments were respected. But something was stirring in them now. Some restlessness that couldn't be satisfied by the pastoral life they'd always known. They had begun to dream of something larger, something more permanent than flocks that moved with the seasons and settlements that could be abandoned when water grew scarce or pastures failed. They had begun to dream of a city. The idea came to them gradually, like dawn breaking slowly over the hills. They would sit on high ground in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the 7 hills, and talk about what could be. Not just a collection of huts and pens, but a real city with walls and gates, with temples to the gods, with houses built from stone that would stand for generations. A place where people could live together in safety, governed by just laws, protected by strong walls, united by common purpose. "Look at these hills," Romulus would say. gesturing at the landscape spread before them. They're perfect for defense. High ground, the river for water and trade, fertile valleys for farming. This is where something great could be built. Remus would nod thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the terrain with a strategist's perspective. The Palatine would be good, he'd say, pointing to the hill where the Chevalf's cave still stood, though they didn't know its significance. Or, perhaps, the Aventinids' slightly higher, better views of the surrounding country. They began to share their vision with others. The young men who followed them grew excited by the idea. The displaced people, the outcasts, the landless younger sons, who had nothing to inherit all of them, saw possibility in what the twins proposed. A new city meant new opportunities, a chance to build something from the beginning, to establish themselves as founders rather than followers. But a city needed more than enthusiasm, it needed divine approval. The Romans, even before Rome existed, were a deeply religious people. They believed that the gods involved themselves in human affairs, that success required divine favor, that major undertakings should not begin without consulting the will of heaven. So Romulus and Remus decided to perform an augury, an ancient form of divination that read the will of the gods through the flight of birds. They chose a day in early spring when the air was clear and the sky vast and blue. They separated, each taking a position on the hill. He favored Romulus on the Palatine, Remus on the Aventine. They would watch the sky from dawn until the gods sent a sign, and whoever saw the more favorable omen would have the right to name and found the city. Imagine Remus sitting on the Aventine in the gray light before dawn, wrapped in his cloak against the morning chill, his eyes scanning the eastern sky. Around him, a group of his supporters waited in silence, respectful of the sacred nature of what was happening. The world was hushed, holding its breath, waiting for the gods to speak. The sun crept above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Birds began their morning songs, small birds, everyday birds, sparrows and finches that meant nothing in the language of augury. Remus waited, patient as he'd learned to be through years of watching flocks, knowing that divine messages couldn't be rushed. Then, cutting through the morning sky, came 6 vultures. They flew in formation, their dark wings spread wide, riding the thermals that rose from the warming earth. Vultures were sacred birds, birds of prophecy, and 6 was a significant number. Remus felt his heart quicken. This was a sign, surely. The gods had spoken. He stood and raised his arms in acknowledgement, while those around him began to cheer. But on the Palatine, Romulus was still watching. The morning advanced. The sun climbed higher. Romulus remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the sky with an intensity that bordered on fierce. He had heard the cheering from the Aventine, knew that Remus had seen something, but he didn't waver. He was waiting for his own sign, trusting that the gods had more to say. And then they came 12 vultures, twice as many as Remus had seen. They appeared from the north, a larger flight, more impressive, their dark forms stark against the bright sky. They circled over the Palatine, soaring on outstretched wings, and Romulus watched them with a mixture of triumph and relief. 12 vultures. The gods had declared themselves clearly. The city would be built here, on the Palatine, and he would be its founder. But the interpretation wasn't as simple as it seemed. When the 2 brothers met later that day, surrounded by their respective supporters, The disagreement began immediately. Remus claimed that his 6 vultures had appeared first, and priority mattered in The gods had spoken to him before they spoke to Romulus, which meant his claim was legitimate. His hill, the Aventine, should be the site of the new city. Romulus countered that number mattered more than timing. 12 vultures was twice the omen that 6 vultures was. The gods had sent a stronger, clearer message through him. The Palatine was obviously the chosen site, and he was obviously the chosen founder. The argument went back and forth, neither brother willing to concede. Their supporters joined in, voices rising, tensions growing. What had started as a sacred ritual to seek divine guidance had become a source of conflict, a wedge driven between brothers who had always been united. This is the tragedy at the heart of ambition, even noble ambition. 2 men can want the same good thing in this case, a city that would provide safety and community for many people and still find themselves in conflict over it. Not because either is wrong, but because both are right, and there's only one city to be built, only one founder to be named. In the days that followed, the brothers tried to find compromise. Perhaps they could found the city together, rule it jointly, share the glory and the burden. But even as they discussed this, tensions simmered. Who would have the final say in disputes? Whose name would the city bear? How could 2 people lead when they disagreed on fundamental matters? Romulus began to build on the Palatine anyway, asserting his right through action rather than waiting for Remus to agree. He marked out boundaries using a plow, drawing a sacred line that would define where the city walls would stand. This was an ancient ritual, one that carried deep religious significance. The furrow the plow created was sacred ground, and the walls that would rise there would be holy, protected by the gods, inviolable. His followers helped him, carrying stones, staking out where gates would stand, beginning the back-breaking work of building walls. The city was taking shape, even though the conflict with Remus remained unresolved. Romulus was decisive, perhaps too decisive, unwilling to let disagreement delay what he saw as destiny. Remus watched from the Aventine, his own supporters around him, and something bitter began to grow in his heart. He had seen the signs first. His hill was better positioned, but his brother was moving forward without him, claiming all the glory, making all the decisions. The partnership they'd always shared was fracturing, and neither of them seemed to know how to stop it. The wall on the Palatine grew slowly, stone by stone, rising from the earth like something inevitable. It wasn't very high yet, perhaps waist height in most places, shoulder height in others. It was more symbolic than defensive at this stage, more about marking sacred boundaries than about military protection. But it was real, it was happening, and with each stone placed, Romulus's claim to sole leadership grew stronger. One afternoon, Remus walked up to the Palatine to see what his brother had built. He stood looking at the wall, this physical manifestation of their disagreement, this barrier that was both real and metaphorical. His supporters were with him, young men who felt as slighted as he did, who whispered encouragement and resentment in equal measure. "This is your great wall," Remus said, his voice carrying across the construction site. A child could step over it. There are different versions of what happened next, different ways the story has been told over the centuries. In some versions, Remus simply stepped over the wall, a gesture of contempt. a way of showing how inadequate the boundary was. In other versions, he jumped over it mockingly, perhaps even dancing across it, making a joke of what Romulus held sacred. What matters is that he crossed it. He violated the sacred boundary that Romulus had drawn. Whether he meant it as a serious challenge or as a brother's teasing, whether he understood the full weight of what he was doing or was caught up in the moment's anger, we cannot know. But he crossed the line, literally and figuratively, and everything changed. Romulus saw it happen, saw his brother, his twin, his other half, leap over the wall he'd been building with such care, saw him land on the sacred ground within, saw him grin as if it meant nothing, and something in Romulus broke horror, perhaps something in him hardened, crystallized into certainty. Some versions say Romulus himself struck his brother down in that moment. Others say it was Celer, one of Romulus's followers, who killed Remus in fury at the sacrilege. Still others suggest it was an accident, a fight that escalated, violence that neither brother truly intended, but that, once begun, couldn't be stopped. But the result was the same. Remus fell. Remus bled. Remus died there, on the Palatine, within the boundaries of a city that would never be his. Killed by, or because of, the brother who had shared his mother's womb, who had been nursed by the same wolf, who had grown up holding the same dreams. The stories say that Romulus spoke words over his brother's body, words that have echoed through history. Whether he truly spoke them, or whether later Romans put them in his mouth to justify what had happened. So perish anyone who crosses my walls. It was a declaration of sovereignty, an assertion that the city's boundaries were inviolable, that laws must be upheld even at terrible cost. It was the statement of a founder, a lawgiver, a king who would not compromise the sacred rules even for his beloved brother. But it was also the cry of a man who had just lost half of himself, who had let ambition and pride destroy the relationship that had defined his entire life. There's no version of this story where Romulus doesn't grieve, where he doesn't kneel beside his brother's body and understand, too late, what he's done and what he's lost. The city would be built. The walls would rise higher. Laws would be established, temples constructed, streets laid out according to Romulus's vision. It would become great, greater than anyone in that moment could have imagined. It would grow into an empire that would span continents and endure for centuries. But it would be built on fratricide, founded in blood, born from the death of one brother at the hands or, at least, at the command of the other. This dark beginning would haunt Rome forever, a shadow at the heart of all its glory, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are built by flawed humans who make terrible choices in the name of great ambitions. As the sun set that evening over the Palatine, painting the sky in shades of crimson that seemed appropriate to the day's violence, Romulus stood alone within his sacred boundaries. Around him, men continued their work in subdued silence, laying stones for walls, digging foundations for gates. The city was being born exactly as he'd envisioned, but his brother was dead. His twin, his companion, the person who had shared every memory from their mysterious infancy onward, gone, because they couldn't agree on which hill to choose, because pride wouldn't bend, because ambition demanded a single founder and fate demanded a terrible price. Romulus would name the city Roma, after himself. He would rule it wisely and well, establish its laws, defend its borders, welcome refugees and outcasts to help it grow. He would become legend, the great founder, the first king, the man who built something lasting from nothing but vision and will. But on quiet nights, for the rest of his life, he would remember his brother's face. He would remember shared childhood, shared dreams, shared love. He would remember the moment when everything broke, when the bond between them shattered like pottery dropped on stone, and he would wonder, in those dark hours, whether any city was worth this price, whether glory built on grief could ever truly shine, whether the gods who had sent 12 vultures to bless his founding had also demanded blood as payment for their favor. The question would remain unanswered. The city would rise, and Rome's story, begun in miracles and tragedy, in rescue and murder, in brotherhood and fratricide, would roll forward into history, carrying the weight of this moment forever. The silence after violence is always profound. It's as if the world itself recoils from what has been done, as if even the birds stop singing, the wind stops blowing. Time itself pauses to absorb the weight of irreversible action. On the Palatine Hill, in the late afternoon light, that silence pressed down on everyone present like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Remus lay on the ground, his blood darkening the earth that would become Rome's foundation. His eyes were open but unseeing, his body still in that terrible way that only death brings. The young men who had been building the wall stood frozen, their hands still holding stones, their faces reflecting shock and horror and a growing understanding that they had just witnessed something that would define them forever. They were no longer just shepherds and farmers helping to build a settlement. They had become participants in a founding myth, witnesses to the birth of a city in blood. Romulus knelt beside his brother's body. His hands were shaking, whether from rage or grief or shock, even he might not have known. He reached out to touch Remus's face, that face so like his own, those features that mirrored his in ways that no other humans ever would. They had come from the same womb, nursed from the same wolf, grown beneath the same stars. They had been two halves of a whole, and now one half was gone, leaving Romulus feeling incomplete in a way that nothing would ever fully heal. Some say he wept, others say his face remained hard as stone, his emotions locked away behind the mask that leaders must wear. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps he wept at first, then forced himself to stop, knowing that others were watching. That weakness in this moment might undo everything he'd worked to build. A founder cannot afford to collapse, even when his heart is breaking. The man some stories blame for the actual blow that killed Remus stood nearby with blood on his hands, literally or metaphorically, depending on which version you believe. If he struck the fatal blow, he did it thinking he was defending Romulus's honor, upholding the sacred boundary that Remus had violated. If Romulus himself killed his brother, then Celer simply stood witness, frozen by the terrible swiftness of it all. "Cover him," Romulus finally said, his voice rough and strange in his own ears. "Prepare him for burial. He will be honored as befits a warrior and a brother." The words came automatically, the rituals of death that every Roman, though they weren't yet called Romans, knew by heart. But even as he spoke them, Romulus must have felt the bitter irony. Honor him as a brother, yes, but a brother he had killed or allowed to be killed. Bury him with respect, yes, but bury him nonetheless. Put him in the ground and cover him with earth. As if that could cover the guilt as well. They built a pyre for Remus on the hill he had favored, the place where he had seen his 6 vultures and believed, for a brief moment, that destiny was his. They laid his body on wood cut from oak trees, dressed him in his best clothes, placed beside him the things he had valued, his shepherd's staff, his hunting spear, a cup they had shared wine from countless times. Romulus lit the pyre himself. It was his responsibility, his burden, his grief, to bear publicly. He stood holding the torch for a long moment before touching it to the oil-soaked wood, watching the flames catch and spread, watching smoke begin to rise into the evening sky. The fire grew quickly, consuming everything, transforming solid flesh into ash and memory, turning his brother from a physical presence into something that existed only in the past. The people gathered around, those who had supported Romulus, those who had supported Remus, those who had simply been watching from the sidelines, hoping to be part of something great. They stood in silence as the fire burned through the night, each lost in their own thoughts about what this meant, about whether the price being paid was worth what was being purchased. As dawn broke, the fire had burned down to embers and ash. Tradition demanded that Romulus gather the bones, wash them in wine, place them in an urn for burial. He did these things with his own hands, refusing to let anyone else touch what remained of his twin. His fingers, still strong and capable, handled the fragments with a tenderness that spoke of love that death couldn't erase. Even if it had been love, complicated by ambition, wounded by pride, ultimately destroyed by the inability to share power. They buried Remus's ashes on the Aventine, marking the spot with stones. In later years, Romans would build a temple there, sanctifying the place where the founder's brother rested, acknowledging the tragedy that lay at their city's heart. But on that morning, it was just a gravel pile of earth, hiding an urn of ashes, hiding a young man's dreams of what might have been. After the burial, Romulus returned to the Palatine alone. He walked the boundaries he had drawn, the sacred furrow that had cost so much to defend. He looked at the walls, rising stone by stone, the gates taking shape, the streets being laid out according to his vision. This was his city now, indisputably his, paid for in the currency that fate seems to demand from those who would build lasting things paid for in blood and grief and permanent loss. He made a decision in those quiet hours. The city would be called Romarum, taking its name from him as the sole founder. But he would honor Remus's memory in other ways. He would make this city worthy of the sacrifice, whether that sacrifice had been willing or forced, noble or tragic. He would build something that would last, something that would justify, if anything could, the terrible price that had been paid. The work continued. More people came, drawn by the promise of a new beginning, of a place where outcasts and refugees could find belonging. Romulus welcomed them all, needing numbers to make his city viable, needing hands to build and defend, needing citizens to fill the streets and homes he was creating. Rome became known as a sanctuary, a place where your past didn't matter as much as your willingness to work for the future. But Romulus changed after his brother's death. Those who had known him before noticed it. The easy laughter came less frequently. The quick smile that had once lit his face now appeared rarely and never reached his eyes fully. He became more serious, more focused, more driven. Perhaps he was trying to outrun guilt. Or perhaps he simply understood that he was building on a foundation of tragedy, and therefore had to build twice as well, twice as carefully, twice as grandly to make it worthwhile. He established laws, clear rules about property and conduct, about crime and punishment, about the sacred and the profane. Some say the laws were harsh, but they were also fair, applied equally to everyone regardless of status. The boundary of the city was sacred, and anyone who violated it would face consequences. This was the lesson written in Remus's blood. Laws must mean something. Boundaries must be respected. Order must be maintained even at personal cost. He organized the people into groups, centuries, and tribes. Ways of dividing the population that made governance possible and military service efficient. He established the Senate, a council of elders who would advise him, though in these early days his word was still law. He was king, founder, lawgiver, judge, all the roles necessary to transform a vision into a functioning reality. He built temples to the gods, acknowledging that Rome existed because of divine favor as well as human effort. A temple to Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, thanking the King of Gods for blessing the foundation. A temple to Mars, honoring the god they believed to be his father, though Romulus didn't yet know the full truth of his origin. Altars to Vesta, goddess of the hearth, because every city needed a sacred fire that would never be allowed to die. The years passed. Rome grew from a collection of huts into a proper town, from a town into a city. Walls rose higher and stronger, built with the engineering skill that would later make Romans famous throughout the world. Roads were laid out in careful grids. Aqueducts were begun to bring fresh water from distant springs. Markets were established where goods could be traded. Houses were built from stone rather than wood, meant to last for generations. But Rome had a problem. The refugees and outcasts who had flocked to Romulus's sanctuary were mostly male, and a city cannot survive without families, without children, without the next generation. Romulus understood this, and he devised a solution that would become another dark chapter in Rome's founding story: the abduction of the Sabine women. A mass kidnapping that would be justified as necessary, but would carry its own weight of violence and moral compromise. But that's another story for another time. What matters now is that Rome was growing, thriving, becoming something significant in the landscape of ancient Italy. Other cities watched with concern as this upstart settlement gained power and influence. Alba Longa, the mother city where Romulus and Remus had been born, looked at Rome with complicated feelings, pride perhaps, at an offshoot that was succeeding, but also worry at a potential rival. Romulus never remarried. After some accounts say he had a wife who died. Or perhaps he never married at all, too focused on his city to make room for personal happiness. He lived for Rome, devoted every waking hour to making it stronger, safer, more prosperous. He led armies in defense of its borders, negotiated treaties with neighboring peoples, settled disputes among his citizens, performed the religious rituals that kept the gods' favor flowing toward his creation. But always, in quiet moments, his thoughts would return to Remus, to the brother who should have been standing beside him, ruling jointly, sharing the burdens and the glory. He would wonder what Remus would have thought of some decision he'd made, how Remus would have solved some problem differently. What jokes Remus would have made to lighten the weight of responsibility. Some nights, Romulus would walk alone to the Aventine, to the place where Remus was buried. He would stand there in the darkness, speaking to a ghost, asking for forgiveness or understanding or simply companionship in the loneliness that leadership brings. Whether Remus's spirit heard him, whether any reconciliation was possible beyond death, no one can say. But Romulus kept returning to that spot, as if some part of him still hoped to bridge the gap that violence had created. The Romans, who came after, would tell this story with different emphases. Sometimes they celebrated Romulus's firmness in upholding the sacred boundary, seeing in his willingness to sacrifice even his brother a lesson about putting law above personal feelings. Sometimes they mourned the tragedy of it, seeing in the fratricide a warning about the costs of ambition and the dangers of pride. Both interpretations carried truth. What cannot be disputed is that Rome was founded in violence, that its first act as a city was murder, that the relationship between its founder and the brother he loved and killed would haunt its imagination forever. The Romans would return to this story again and again, in their plays and poems, their histories and philosophical debates, trying to understand what it meant, what it said about them, what lessons could be drawn from such a complicated and painful beginning. Perhaps the lesson is simply this, that greatness and tragedy are often intertwined, that the same ambition that builds cities can also destroy relationships, that even the best intentions can lead to terrible outcomes when pride and power enter the equation. Or perhaps the lesson is about the cost of civilization itself, that every ordered society is built on boundaries and laws that must be enforced. Even when enforcement breaks hearts and spills blood. Romulus lived a long life, according to legend. He ruled Rome for many years, guiding it through its vulnerable early decades, establishing traditions that would last for centuries. And when he finally died or disappeared, as some stories say, taken up into heaven by his father Mars and transformed into the god Quirinus, Rome was strong enough to survive without him, his laws and institutions solid enough to carry forward. But his greatest monument wasn't the walls he built, or the laws he established, or the territory he conquered. His greatest monument was more complicated, more human, more tragic. It was the memory of two brothers who dreamed the same dream but couldn't find a way to share it, who loved each other but destroyed each other, who founded a great city but paid for it with a bond that could never be repaired. That's what Rome was built on, not just ambition and vision and divine favor, but also grief and guilt and the terrible knowledge that sometimes you lose the things you love most in the process of achieving the things you want most. It's a foundation that every great empire understands, whether it admits it or not. Glory has a price, and that price is almost always higher than anyone expects to pay. Stories have lives of their own. They grow and change, taking on new meanings with each generation that tells them, adapting to fit new circumstances while retaining their essential truth. The story of Romulus and Remus, of the she-wolf and the twins, of brotherhood and tragedy, would become one of the most enduring stories in human history, told and retold for over 2,000 years. Carved in stone and struck on metal, painted on walls and written in books. whispered by mothers to children and declaimed by orators in marble forums. But why? What made this particular story so powerful, so essential to Roman identity, that it survived the fall of the very empire it helped to create? Why did the image of a wolf nursing to human infants become one of the most recognizable symbols in Western civilization? Perhaps because it spoke to something deep in the Roman soul, something they understood about themselves and wanted to believe was true. The story told them that they came from humble origins, that their founder was raised by shepherds rather than in palaces, that divine blood ran in their veins even as they worked with calloused hands. It told them that they were survivors, protected by gods and nature alike, capable of thriving in impossible circumstances. The she-wolf became their mother in more than just the literal sense. She represented Rome itself, fierce and protective, nurturing to her own but dangerous to enemies, wild yet civilized, natural yet divine. When Romans looked at the image of Lupa with the twins at her teats, they saw themselves children of the wilderness who had built the greatest civilization the world had known, people who carried both savagery and sophistication in their hearts, who could be both ruthless and merciful depending on what the moment required. The most famous representation of this image still survives today, though the centuries have complicated its story just as they complicated Rome's story. The Capitoline wolf, a bronze statue showing the she-wolf standing alert, her head turned to look behind her, her teats swollen with milk, and beneath her 2 human infants reaching up to nurse. It's a masterpiece of ancient metalwork, probably cast sometime between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE, though scholars still debate the exact date. The she-wolf's expression is remarkable, not savage or threatening, but watchful and protective, her ears pricked forward, her body tense with awareness, ready to defend what she guards. The statue stood in Rome for centuries, weathering time and conflict, surviving the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, witnessing triumph and disaster with equal bronze patience. Medieval Romans still revered it, though by then they had forgotten much of their pagan past and reinterpreted old symbols through Christian lenses. Renaissance artists studied it, drawing inspiration from its elegant lines and emotional power. Napoleon's armies carted it off to Paris as plunder, only for it to be returned years later, resuming its place as a symbol of Roman identity. Interestingly, the twins themselves, the bronze figures of Romulus and Remus nursing beneath the wolf, were added much later, probably during the Renaissance, over 1,000 years after the wolf was cast. This tells us something important. The wolf mattered more than the specifics of the story. The wolf was the essential element, the core symbol around which everything else breathed. She was the mother, the protector, the wild heart of Roman civilization. But the Capitoline wolf wasn't the only representation. The she-wolf appeared everywhere in Roman culture. She was struck on coins, sometimes alone, sometimes with the twins, sometimes with stars above her, representing divine favor. When a Roman soldier carried such a coin in his purse, marching to distant frontiers to extend the empire's reach, he carried the wolf with him, reminder of who he was, where he came from, what values he was meant to uphold. The wolf appeared on official seals and standards, on the armor of generals, in the mosaics of wealthy homes, in relief carvings on public buildings. She was painted on pottery, carved on sarcophagi, rendered in every medium the Romans mastered. Each representation was slightly different, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle, sometimes realistic, sometimes stylized, but always recognizable, always carrying the same essential meaning. Temples honored the story. The Lupercal, the cave where the she-wolf supposedly nursed the twins. Every year on February 15th, Romans celebrated the Luper, a festival that involved priests running through the streets dressed in goatskin, a ritual that reached back to the city's earliest days, connecting contemporary Romans to their legendary origins. The festival was chaotic and joyful, involving elements of purification and fertility, youth and wildness, a yearly reminder that Rome's civilization was built on a foundation of nature and divinity intertwined. The fig tree where the basket supposedly came to rest, the ficus rumina, preserved and tended for centuries. When it died, a new fig tree was planted in the same spot, and then another when that one died, maintaining the continuity of the sacred place even as the actual tree was replaced again and again. Romans understood the power of place, the way certain locations carry meaning beyond their physical properties. How a spot of earth can become holy through association with significant events. Poets wrote about the she-wolf and the twins, elaborating the story, adding details, exploring its meaning. Virgil, in the Aeneid, connected the twins to the Trojan hero Aeneas, creating a lineage that stretched from burning Troy through the foundation of Alba Longa to the birth of Rome, giving Romans an epic history that rivaled the Greeks. Livy, in his monumental History of Rome, told the story with both skepticism and reverence, acknowledging that some details might be legendary while insisting that the essential truth remained important. Ovid played with the story in his poetry, examining it from different angles, asking questions about fate and free will, about divine intervention and human agency. Was the she-wolf really a goddess in disguise? Was Mars truly the twins' father, or was that a comforting fiction to explain an embarrassing pregnancy? Ovid never answered definitively. He was too sophisticated for that, but his questions kept the story alive, kept people thinking about it, debating it, finding new meanings in its ancient patterns. Plutarch, the Greek biographer, wrote about Romulus with the detached curiosity of an outsider trying to understand Roman culture. He collected different versions of the story, noting variations and contradictions, trying to separate history from myth. But even he couldn't help being moved by the image of the she-wolf, by the power of a story that had shaped a civilization. The symbol evolved over time. When Rome became an empire, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon and Augustus established the Principate, the she-wolf took on new meanings. She represented not just Rome's origins, but its destiny, not just survival, but dominance, not just protection of her own young, but conquest of all who opposed her. The nurturing mother became also the fierce predator, and Romans were comfortable with both aspects, seeing no contradiction in being both merciful and merciless, depending on circumstances. Early Christians struggled with the symbol. How could they, who worshipped the Lamb of God, embrace the she-wolf? How could they, who preached peace and forgiveness, celebrate a city founded in Yet they couldn't entirely reject it either, because Rome was their city too. the place where Peter and Paul had been martyred, where the church had established its earthly headquarters. So they reinterpreted the symbol, seeing in the Shevolf's mercy to the twins a prefiguring of divine providence, seeing in the story a parable about how God can bring good from evil, order from chaos, salvation from unlikely sources. Medieval Romans still identified with the wolf. When the empire had fallen and Rome was just another Italian city, often fought over, sometimes sacked, diminished from its ancient glory, the Shevolf reminded them that they had survived worse. Their founder had been cast out to die and had lived. Their city had been born in blood. They would endure this too, these dark ages, because endurance was written into their DNA, embodied in the bronze wolf who stood watch over them still. Renaissance. Artists rediscovered the classical world and fell in love with its imagery. They painted the Shevolf and twins countless times, each artist bringing their own interpretations, some emphasizing the wildness, others the tenderness, others the mythological grandeur. Rubens painted it with Baroque exuberance. Countless others whose names are lost to time painted it too, on walls that have since crumbled, in books that have been burned, keeping the image alive through centuries of change. Modern Rome, the capital of a united Italy, a bustling 21st century metropolis, still claims the Shevolf. She appears on the city's official seal. Statues of her stand in public places. Tourists buy miniature replicas as souvenirs, carrying the ancient symbol home to distant countries, spreading it across the world. The airport, the soccer team, the police force all use variations of the Shevolf in their insignia. She belongs to everyone now, but she still belongs most deeply to Rome. What does the symbol mean to modern people? Perhaps something different than it meant to ancient Romans, yet also something essentially the same. It still speaks of survival against odds, of finding nurture in unexpected places, of the wild and the civilized existing together rather than in opposition. It reminds us that our origins matter, that the stories we tell about where we come from shape who we become, that symbols can carry meaning across millennia, because they touch something universal in human experience. The Shevolf tells us that mothers come in many forms, human and animal, biological and adoptive, expected and miraculous. She tells us that protection and fierceness are compatible with love, that strength can be gentle and gentleness can be strong. She tells us that nature and civilization need not be enemies, that wildness has its place even in the most ordered society, that we contain multitudes and contradictions, and that's not a flaw, but a feature of human complexity. And perhaps most importantly, she tells us that beginnings don't determine endings. Yes, Rome was founded in tragedy, twins cast out, one brother killing another, violence at the heart of the story. But from those dark beginnings came something remarkable, something that influenced law and language and culture across half the world. Something that survived for over 1,000 years in its imperial form and continues to influence us today. More than 1,500 years after the Western Empire fell, the Shevolf nursed 2 babies who should have died. One of them went on to found a city. That city became an empire. That empire shaped Western civilization. And all of it traces back to a moment of impossible mercy, when a wild creature chose to nurture rather than devour, to protect rather than prey upon, to offer love to those who had been abandoned by humans. It's a powerful story. It's a true story, in the way that the best myths are true not necessarily in every historical detail, but in the deeper truths about human nature, about survival and resilience, about the complicated relationship between violence and creation, about how greatness and tragedy are so often intertwined that we cannot separate them without losing something essential. The bronze she-wolf stands in her museum now, protected from weather and time, gazed upon by millions who come to see her. Her bronze is green with age in places, polished bright in others, where conservators have cleaned her. Her eyes, cast in metal nearly 3,000 years ago, still seem alert, still seem to be watching for threats, still seem ready to defend what she guards. And what does she guard? Not just to bronze infants, added centuries after she was cast. She guards memory. She guards identity. She guards the story of a city that believed itself chosen by the gods, protected by nature, destined for greatness despite humble origins and tragic complications. She guards the idea that we are all, in some sense, foundlings cast adrift by circumstances, rescued by unexpected mercy, capable of building something enduring if we're brave enough to try. The she-wolf endures because Rome endures, and Rome endures because its story, for all its violence and tragedy, was also a story of hope, of possibility, of the wild and sacred combination of chance and choice that creates history. As long as people tell stories, as long as cities rise and fall, as long as we struggle with questions about who we are and where we came from and what we might become, the she-wolf will remain relevant. Her ancient bronze speaking to something timeless in the human heart. She is mother, symbol, guardian, myth. She is fierce and gentle, wild and tame, real and legendary. She is Rome's heart, cast in metal, surviving empires. And she is ours too, now a gift from the ancient world, reminding us that mercy matters, that protection matters, that the stories we tell about ourselves shape the reality we create. The wolf watches still. The twins nurse forever, frozen in their moment of salvation. And the story goes on, changing and unchanging, ancient and immediate, as alive now as it was when Romulus first marked out boundaries on a hill above the Tiber, when the she-wolf first heard infants crying by the river, when two tiny hearts beat on against impossible odds, beginning something that has not yet ended. As our story comes to its gentle close, let yourself drift back across the centuries. Feel time moving beneath you like the Tiber's current, carrying you forward from that ancient world to this present moment, from legend to memory, from history to dream. The journey has been long, hasn't it? We've walked together through tragedy and triumph, through abandonment and rescue, through brotherhood and loss, through the founding of something that would outlast its founders by thousands of years. But the hills are still there. Did you know that? The 7 hills of Rome still rise above the city, though now they're covered with buildings instead of sheep, crowded with people instead of shepherds, crossed by roads that carry cars instead of footpaths worn by bare feet. The Palatine is still there, where Romulus drew his sacred boundary, where emperors would later build their palaces, giving us the word palace itself from the hill's name. You can visit it today if you wish. Walk on ground that has been walked upon for nearly 3,000 years. Touchstones that witness the birth of a civilization, The Tiber still flows, as rivers do, patient and eternal. It's narrower now than it was in ancient times, contained by embankments, bridged by modern spans, no longer wild and free to flood as it once did. But the water is the same water, following the same path, moving from the mountains to the sea as it has since long before humans built their first shelters on its banks. If you stood on its shore in the evening, as the sun sets and the light turns golden, you might hear the same whisper it spoke to the twins in their basket. The same ancient song that has no words but carries meaning nonetheless. The cave where the she-wolf nursed the infants, the Lupercal, was lost for centuries, buried under layer upon layer of later construction, hidden beneath the accumulated debris of ages. But archaeologists believe they've found it again, deep beneath the Palatine Hill. A chamber carved from living rock, silent and dark after all these years. They haven't fully excavated it yet. Perhaps they never will. Some things are more powerful when they remain partially hidden, more sacred when they exist at the boundary between known and unknown, more meaningful when they live in imagination as well as in physical space. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow even further. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever surface supports ubit or chair or floor. Feel gravity's gentle pull. Feel the tiredness in your muscles, the heaviness in your eyelids. You're safe here in this moment. In this place, there are no angry kings pursuing you, no river threatening to swallow you, no walls being built that will divide brothers. There is only this breath and the next, and the soft darkness behind your closed eyes. Imagine yourself there, on the banks of the ancient Tiber, in that time before Rome was Rome. The grass is soft beneath you, still warm from the day's sun, though evening has come and coolness is settling over the land. The river murmurs its eternal song, water over stones, a rhythm older than memory. Above you, stars are beginning to emerge. Then another, then suddenly dozens, hundreds, thousands. The whole vast sweep of the Milky Way painting a river of light across the sky. You can hear sheep bells tinkling in the distance, shepherds calling to their flocks, the sound of simple lives being lived in simple ways. There's wood smoke on the air, and the green smell of growing things, and that particular scent that rivers have, mineral and vegetal and ancient all at once. A night bird calls, and another answers. The world is settling into sleep, as you are settling into sleep, as all things must settle when day is done and darkness offers its gift of rest. Somewhere on the hillside, tending her pups in a cave you cannot see, the twins she once nursed are grown now, or will be grown, or perhaps are still infants. Time moves strangely in this place between waking and dreaming, between history and story, between what was and what might have been. It doesn't matter, really. What matters is the kindness shown, the mercy offered, the impossible rescue that somehow happened, despite all odds against it. What matters is that beings took care of each other, wolf and human, shepherd and foundling, brother and brother, before tragedy intervened. What matters is that a city was built, not perfectly but persistently, not without cost but not without meaning either. What matters is that people tried, that they dreamed, that they created something larger than themselves, even though the process was messy and painful and complicated in all. the ways that human endeavors always are. Let the story wash over you now like water, like the Tiber's ancient current. Let it carry away any tension you're holding, any worry that grips you, any thought that keeps you from the rest you need. You don't have to build a city tonight. You don't have to found an empire, or resolve ancient conflicts, or make sense of complicated legacies. You only have to breathe and rest and let yourself be carried toward sleep like a basket on a gentle river, guided by currents you don't have to understand, moving toward shores you don't have to see, trusting that the journey itself is enough. The Romans believed in something they called pietassa, word that doesn't translate neatly into English. It meant duty and devotion, yes, but also a kind of respect for the natural order of things, for the bonds between people, for the obligations we owe to those who came before us and those who will come after. It meant understanding that we are part of something larger than ourselves, connected to the past and the future by invisible threads that bind us even when we can't see them, lying here, drifting toward sleep. You are connected to those ancient people who first told the story of Romulus and Remus. You are connected to the countless generations who repeated it, who found meaning in it, who used it to understand themselves and their place in the world. You are connected to everyone who has ever gazed at stars and wondered about their origins. Everyone who has ever been rescued by unexpected kindness. Everyone who has ever lost someone they loved and had to find a way to continue living anyway. These connections are real, even if you can't touch them. They exist in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the quiet moments when you stop trying to control everything and simply allow yourself to be. The she-wolf knew this. In her animal ways, she didn't question why she should care for human infants, didn't calculate costs and benefits, didn't overthink the situation. She simply responded to need with nurture, to helplessness with protection, to crying with comfort. Sometimes wisdom is that simple. The stars above the ancient hills are the same stars above you now. Not literally the same. They've moved in their slow cosmic dance. Some have died and been replaced by others. The constellations have shifted in ways that only millennia can measure, but essentially the same part of the same vast universe, shining with the same ancient light, witnessing the same human struggles, played out again and again in different forms but with similar themes. Those stars watched the basket float down the river. They watched the she-wolf nurse the twins. They watched Romulus draw his boundaries and Remus cross them, and everything that followed triumph and tragedy, construction and destruction, the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of civilizations. And through it all, the stars kept shining, patient and indifferent, and somehow comforting in their vast indifference, reminding us that our dramas, however intense they feel, are small parts of something incomprehensibly large. This should not diminish what we feel or what we do. The twins' story mattered, even though it's ancient now. Rome's glory mattered, even though the empire fell. Your life matters, even though you're one person among billions, even though your struggles feel small sometimes, even though the stars would shine whether you existed or not. Mattering isn't about scale, it's about meaning. And meaning is something we create through caring, through trying, through showing up and doing our best, even when the outcome is uncertain. The she-wolf cared for 2 infants when she could have ignored them or eaten them. that care mattered. Faustulus chose to raise children who weren't his own. That choice mattered. Romulus built a city despite heartbreak. That persistence mattered. And you, lying here now, breathing softly, letting yourself rest, this matters too. Taking care of yourself, allowing yourself to sleep, trusting that tomorrow will come and you'll be ready to meet it. These are not small things. They're the foundation of everything else, the quiet acts that make all other acts possible. Let go now. Let go of the story. Let go of trying to understand or remember or analyze. Let go of ancient Rome and she-wolves and twin brothers and walls and cities. Let all of it dissolve into the darkness behind your eyes, becoming texture rather than text, feeling rather than thought, simply the gentle weight of history settling around you like a blanket, warm and soft and safe. The river flows on. It has always flowed. It will always flow, carrying its water to the sea, beginning again with mountain rain, completing its cycle endlessly. You are like that river flowing, continuing part of something larger, held by banks you didn't build, moving toward destinations you don't control, beautiful in your movement, powerful in your persistence, life-giving in your passage through the world. Sleep now. Sleep like the twins slept in the Chevalf's cave, warm and safe and protected. Sleep like Romulus might have slept after a long day of building, exhausted but satisfied, trusting that tomorrow he'd wake and continue the work. Sleep like shepherds slept on hillsides under stars, with sheep bells and wind and the vast, peaceful darkness wrapping around them. There is nothing more you need to do tonight. The story is told. The city is built. The wolf has saved her children. The river flows on. And you can rest, can finally rest, can let yourself drift down into sleep like a basket on gentle water, guided by currents of dream, carried toward the morning that will come. As mornings always come, bringing light to the 7 hills, to the eternal river, to the world that somehow keeps turning despite everything, despite tragedy and loss and all the complications of living. Rest well, dear listener. May your dreams be gentle, your sleep be deep, and may you wake refreshed, ready to build your own city in whatever form that takes, with whatever tools you have, on whatever hill you choose. The story continues, always, and now you're part of it, connected to ancient Rome. 2 nursing wolves, 2 twin brothers, 2 shepherds and kings, and everyone who has ever wondered where they came from and what they're meant to do, and whether any of it matters. It does matter. You matter. Now, sleep, and let history's gentle lullaby carry you into darkness, into the peaceful place where stories end and dreams begin, where the past meets the present meets the future, where everything is connected and nothing needs to be understood, only felt, only breathed, only allowed to be. Good night. The river is singing. The stars are watching. The wolf is still protecting her young, even now, even across all these centuries. And you are safe. Sleep now. Sleep.